You were very helpful with this, so thank you for it. We're about to publish this. Hopefully you'll make my book party. Michael helped me write it. You helped me write it. Max helped me write it. There's a whole group of people that are in here. But you are genius level at predictions. Okay, so last time I had you on the show, Bitcoin was in the mid 50s to high 60s range. You said we're going to 100,000. I said, when are we getting to 100,000? You said by the end of the year. Okay,
yeah.
So why did you say that? What did you see? And what do you see for Bitcoin over the next 6 months?
Part of the reason we have stayed constructive on Bitcoin is the price is following closely the prior halving cycles. The halving cycle, for your viewers, is when the block reward gets cut in half. That happened earlier this year. So there's a reduction in new supply. And the sweet spot of that price gain as supply is cut starts to happen towards the end of this year and then into next year. And I think that as like sort of core cryptos, we are also entering what I think is alt season. Next year is really when I think the crypto market could broaden. And this is where those who are really experts on crypto, and I know you run a crypto fund, actually are gonna have some alpha, because that is actually when many altcoins could do really well. I think that the stronger Bitcoin is, the stronger the ecosystem becomes, and so many of these utility tokens and things that are tokenizing really start to have a lot of expected value. But I don't follow this as closely. Sean Farrell is much closer to sort of how to play alt season, and of course Skybridge.
Well, I mean, listen, we own things like Avalanche, we own Polkadot, we own Solana. We don't have lots of altcoins, but our performance has been great. But tariffs, taxes.
Yeah. Well, these are all areas that we're all going to be watching very closely. On let's say food, because you mentioned food. To me, the most important really is grain prices, because they've actually been softening. That would be really welcome if grain prices fell, because that would take the front end of food inflation out. Some of that could be because markets are trying to price in an ending of the conflict in the Ukraine, because that would help bring down grain prices, because it would just take away friction from the market. With regard to tariffs, I think that there is a lot of saber rattling, because throwing 300% tariffs on products would be, of course, very economic. It would just create so much turmoil in the economy. But what I have heard from way to convince bond markets, it's not that someone will pay the bill. And maybe that's because maybe you need a crypto strategy before you can actually do that.
Well, I mean, if you put 1 billion Bitcoin tokens on the balance sheet and Bitcoin goes to 250, you've got extra reserves on your balance sheet. Psychologically, I think that could help. But you're in a box if you're the Fed chair. First of all, will Donald Trump keep Jerome Powell? Remember, he appointed Jerome Powell. So he rails on him, but he did appoint him. Okay, so the question is, will he keep him? And what does Jerome Powell do over the next 12 months?
Yeah, the Fed, I think Fed Chair Powell is really independent. He's done, in my opinion, a great job. I mean, he's navigated the U.S. financial system through the pandemic and then an inflation war and then actual wars. So I think he's handling the threats of his lack of independence well. I think he's done a great, naturally have higher PE multiples. And so if you just apply a 20 to 25 multiple, you're getting, 15,000. So I know it sounds like people say, "Well, 15,000 sounds crazy," and 2 years ago it might have sounded crazy, even though we had, that forecast was in place more than 2 years ago. That forecast has been in place probably for 5 or 6 years, but now that we're at 6,000, we're that much closer to 15,000. It's not a quantum leap any longer.
My last question before I go on to the audience questions: how do you assess the impact of the artificial intelligence? And is it all positive? Could it be dystopian? Could military adversaries of ours get a hold of it? Could someone figure out how to put an artificially intelligent worm into our Pentagon or our power system, or are you just not worried about any of that?
Much more important because it does secure your information. I think that's one solution, but so I think there's a lot of risks, actually, personally. I think if you unleash AI systems in the financial market, there's going to be a lot of people who make dirty trades that trick people and spoof people, and there'll be fake headlines because that's how you manipulate markets.
All right. I mean, it's great stuff. You've laid out a bull case. You've laid out the crypto case. You've given us some common sense on interest rates and tariffs and taxes. Let's go to the questions. If inflation makes a resurgence in 2025, as some have speculated, do you believe Bitcoin and crypto assets could act as reliable hedges, or are there better options? This is Juan from Florida. Good question, Juan.
Juan, hi. Historically, hedges for inflation have been land, like owning real estate, owning gold, which I think is still valid. But I think now they're
in the coming years. Harry from Switzerland.
I'd love Anthony's views too, but I just share that I know onshoring is something that the U.S. is pursuing, like de-globalization. I think that's what you're talking about. I'm sure companies are will do this if it leads to higher profits. I think a lot of people look at this as companies are going to onshore and there's like suddenly inflation in America. We know that won't happen, because if some manufacturer is making a product in America now and it's twice as expensive, they're going to lose all their business because someone will buy cheaper alternatives from other countries. So I think there's, in my opinion, less of it than people realize. And any of the moves that are made are because the savings from transport are, zero interest bonds. And so they're funding this without having to actually pay for the interest expense. Now, you might think that this is a little bit reckless, but it turns out it's a very novel strategy because they have created a lot of network value. They're one of the largest holders of Bitcoin now, and ultimately they may become the second largest holder of Bitcoin after the US government. And they're doing this with the ability to borrow at very low cost. You might wonder, why are bondholders buying these bonds? They're offering for the first time the ability for someone to put $1 billion of work in the bond world to own a bond that has exposure to Bitcoin. These have been incredibly high-performing bonds. They've been the best-performing bonds. They're considered to be increasingly fractious political system. Like there's very little in the middle anymore. I'm actually I'm registered as an independent. I no longer see myself affiliated with either the Republican or Democratic Party. And I have been for several elections. If you want to know what to hedge yourself with, is just to see what's done well in the last 8 years as a political hedge. And one, it's obvious that Bitcoin's been a great hedge against political uncertainty because you know what? It's censorship resistant. If you own the keys, you own the coin. No one can seize it from you. Technology stocks have been great political hedges because at the end of the day, demand for technology has nothing to do with being in favor with one political party or the other. Technology companies like the Mag 7 have just changed the world and they've become really important. So I'd probably say that those two are your safest, and because you don't know what the ceiling is.
Amen. And Michael Saylor would probably disown me. I can't give up my Bitcoin. Let's go to the next one. What can investors learn from crypto's recent growth to prepare for the next phase? Daniel from Illinois.
Daniel, the biggest lesson for me, because we've been following crypto for more than 9 years now, or on our 9th year, really. You have to, the one thing that people have been saying for many years is that something is going to replace Bitcoin. And so you want to own the next Bitcoin. But all I've seen